Hi again then guys, and welcome to a 2-in-1 video, technically a review of course the latest car to be added to Gran Turismo Sport, the Mazda RX-Vision GT3, but technically this car also, just like the Supra did last time, represents the newest update in the game, the 1.59 patch in particular. However, there's not a huge amount to talk about, which is why this is predominantly just a car review video. There are a couple of changes, I believe some tag heuer changes in the game as far as sponsorship goes, some new time trial events, there's a livery competition for the Mazda. That's not a livery competition run by me incidentally, so that's not here on the channel. You can find out about that online though. But as far as this car goes, what are my first impressions? What is the review? Is it a good car? Was it worth all of the hype and the wait? Well, some of you who are watching this video just spoke to the screen. You said, no, it wasn't worth the wait, it's trash. Because I've been hearing that a lot about this vehicle, people saying that the brakes are not very good, the handling is very inconsistent, the car kind of tries to spin out under heavy braking and sometimes when exiting corners, that it basically is a disappointment of a car. Although I can understand some of those issues, I will say I actually like this car. A lot, in fact. It's one of my favourite cars that's been recently added to the game, because to be clear, one of the primary important things that I always do on this channel is, as much as I criticise polyphony, I am always objective with the vehicles in the game, because every car has the right to be viewed and given every chance it can be to be good and to be useful. So if I trash a car, it means it must be pretty bad. And on this occasion, to be honest with you, I think people are blowing this vehicle way out of proportion. I understand why the hopes were so high. Of course, we are not having as many cars, people around the world are in an unusually high amount of stress right now, and a wild variety of other factors are contributing to those opinions. However, I will say that if this was not this car, if it was just some other Vision GT, people would be saying, well actually, it's pretty good. In fact, it's a lot better than a number of the other Vision GTs from equally large manufacturers. Now, one of my favourite things about this car is actually the way in which it slots into the game. Because like the game or not, again, my thoughts are definitely out there, I will say that this definitely suits Group 3 a whole lot more than the Atenza ever could. And I said that, in fact, in my announcement video for this car being confirmed. The Atenza's great in its own way, but it's always been more of a touring car kind of machine, almost like a DTM sort of thing, but not quite as quick. It just doesn't fit in with the rest of these cars. This one definitely does. Now, I said on the Discord chat, when I was putting out some of my initial thoughts to the gang over there, that this car reminds me very specifically, actually, of a car from Gran Turismo's past, both in the shape of the vehicle, with that very long bonnet, where you're almost sitting over the rear axle, but also in terms of how it performs. The kind of slightly inconsistent handling that can sometimes catch you out, but at the same time, good raw potential that does give you a lot to work with. And that vehicle is the Gillette Vertigo. That is what this Mazda reminds me of. The shape is very similar to that car, not quite as extreme, but very similar, that's for sure. It's certainly very cabin backward in terms of its design, but in terms of that handling and those criticisms that people have made, they're not without merit. I'm not saying that those people are just wrong, I'm saying that those handling characteristics have most definitely been blown way out of proportion. I drove this car for the first time in this event. If you look at the bottom of the screen at the start of the video, I'd never driven the car before. So, this is my first experience of the Mazda. I've done no tuning to it whatsoever. All I've done is turn the traction control off. The suspension, the gearbox, the diff, even the downforce. The tyres, for instance, they're still hard. I haven't done anything to it to give it any kind of advantage, and in this AI event I put myself at the back of the grid, hundreds of feet behind, no boost, no slipstream, I always use an automatic, of course I'm using a controller rather than a wheel, and yet, spoiler alert, I finished second overall to, of course, the mighty M6s, which were always in the lead, by half a second. From the back of the grid in a 10-minute event. Now, of course, there are plenty of drivers in the game, finalists for instance, who could have won, probably a lap ahead. But my point is, it's clearly not a bad car. If you can catch up and just run all the way up through the grid, even on the highest difficulty with all of those disadvantages and no tuning at all, well, clearly it's not as bad as everyone's saying it is. However, To give some credence to those issues, I will agree with people that it does have those issues. You'll notice a couple of times in this event that the handling does get a little bit squirrely, in particular on the final corner, where you slow right down almost to a crawl and then accelerate of course out toward the start-finish line. On a couple of occasions the car does get very slippery there. And the interesting thing is, it's actually the front end which tends to get slippery first, not the back, which is what you typically expect from something like an RX-8 or an RX-7 LM race car. They're kind of known for being more tail-happy, especially the RX-7. This one is the opposite. It gets a bit light over the front and then the back end quickly follows. In some ways it reminds me of a combination of the Vertigo, as I said, with a little bit of mid-engine NSX Super GT in there as well, that kind of inconsistent handling that can sometimes have. As far as the point of the braking, I get what people are saying. You know, under heavy braking the car has a tendency for the back end to kind of want to overtake the front, but I don't think it's as bad as people are making it seem. I certainly didn't find it to be that bad. There are a couple of times, again, as you can see in the video, where the car will kind of initiate a drift without you wanting it to, and of course that can be annoying, but if you look at the amount of laps that I did, the competition of the other vehicles, and the speeds that I'm doing, well, any race car can step its tail out, so that is literally nothing new. Most, if not all, of these cars in this kind of category are rear-wheel drive, so of course you can step the tail out. And you can't turn around and tell me that this car with no tuning is more challenging than a Huracan or a Ferrari 458, because that's simply false. Those cars are notorious for being challenging without tuning. This is no way near that difficult to drive. In fact, 9 times out of 10, the handling is very planted, very stable, and it's got plenty of grip. Ultimately, I can understand being negative because you don't feel happy about the game. Trust me. I mean, you guys know me. If you've watched my videos, you know my opinions about the game, and yet even I can be objective about this car. And for all of the criticism that it gets, I think half of it, at least, is unfair. I think this is actually a good, if not a great little Group 3 machine. I like it a hell of a lot more than the Atenza, and I plan to use it more than a lot of the other Group 3 cars when it comes to choosing one. Now, I will say, I haven't tuned it yet, so of course it could get worse or better, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what tuning can do, because if it's already this good stock, well then, even if tuning makes it worse, I've already got this baseline to work with. So is it necessarily the quickest thing out there? No, not necessarily. However, that's kind of the point. Group 3 is supposed to be competitive across the board. And yes, of course some cars are known to be quicker, but even if you look at Polyphony's own way of telling you which cars they think are good, in other words, look at how the cars are on the grid through the race and see how it pans out, well of course the 2 BMW M6s are always at the front of the pack. The Audi R8 is usually, what, high-end, maybe middle to higher on the grid. Well, they put their version of the Mazda, as you can see in this video, in like 4th place. That's high on the grid. And the only thing above it is, as I said, the Beamers and the newer Aston DBR9, which isn't even fair to have in this category anyway. But the point remains, they clearly think that this car is good enough to have pretty high on the grid, and pretty high in the events as well. I think it's actually a much better car than a lot of people are giving it credit for. I love the sound, I love the look of it, and although of course everyone is entitled to choosing what vehicle they do or don't think suits them, but I do think that the overwhelming amount of feedback that I've heard so far has been negative around this car, and I simply don't think that's fair. There can't be that many people who find this car difficult to drive, because it really isn't. And I think it's kind of strange. As I said, there are external factors applying to the game at the moment, such as the worldwide situation, eased up or not eased up, as, you know, it will probably depend on where you live, but all of these external stress factors combined with the date that the game came out, how long its life is now, how few cars we're getting, people look into the future of Gran Turismo, all of these factors always have an effect on our attitude and our opinion when it comes to something new coming to the game. So, as I said, yes, I can totally understand not being happy, for instance, with Gran Turismo Sport at the moment. However, I think that taking out that frustration on this car is kind of unfair. I think it's a nice little race car. Is it the best thing since sliced bread or a god-tier OP vehicle? No, it's not. But that's kind of a good thing, because if it was, we'd be complaining about that as well, because you really can't please some people. The car turns out like this, they say it's not good enough. The car turns out to be better than a Nissan GTR, and people say, well, of course, it's Asian. Of course they made it good. well, like I said, you can't please some people. That's it for my thoughts though. Stick around on the channel for more, and I will be looking into doing a tune for it soon on the channel as well. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.